So essentially, very, very basic file, but we've got a file there ready to go. Okay.
How then? How do I make that go across to the print to the E200?
Yeah, rightio. So basically, very simple use with the GCC machines. We've just got the print. We just go through the print driver that we installed earlier. So basically, let's just lasso in Corel Draw. You can just it's different to most of the other programs in that you can just print what's selected. So in this case, let's select our piece of artwork here. We can go to the print icon up the top here, or we can go file print, both the same result. Now, another thing we need to do here, and it's typically only the first time that we have to change a couple of things here. Let's choose the E200 off our print list. Now, very, very important. Well, actually, while we're on this page, let's discuss further. The print range in this case, as I discussed, is the selection. And if you look over at the print preview window on the right here, you can start to see what the laser is looking at. The other thing I was going to say, which is very important, the color conversions, which is under the color tab, must be set to the laser, not to Corel Draw. In its default mode, it will come through with color conversions performed by Corel Draw. Now that won't work successfully. The color conversions must be done by the laser. So that must be changed. Composite tab, there's nothing there that needs to be looked at. The layout tab, we would normally reposition the images. And if you watch the preview here, we reposition the images to the top left corner. And essentially that's all we need to do. Now, if we go back to the general tab, once again, we've got this ability here to save those settings. And we can save as, and we can store this anywhere. I'm going to call that E200 print settings. And go save. Once again, what that means is next time you're going to print, without having to go to all the fuss and remember and check all the different tabs, you can just choose E200 print settings, and it will automatically import those for you. Okay, so those are the setup, I suppose. Typically only need to be done the first time you use the print driver, but you do need to know about it. Okay, now we're going to move on to the actual where we're going to instruct the laser what to do with the different colors. Now that's done under the preferences button here. So if we click that, we'll now open up in the print window. Now, what I'm going to suggest is in your typical use of the machine, you will use manual color fill. Just to go over it briefly, black and white mode is essentially for photo processing, where it will change your artwork to black and white and shades of grey, and the resulting output from the laser, it would automatically adjust the dot size and the dot intensity to give you a varying result. So yes, you can get typically a black and white appearance, or the appearance of a black and white photo, I guess we'd say, with a image engraving. For now, because we're not doing that, we have got black and we've got a specific color in that red for cutting. We're going to change the mode setting to manual color fill. We won't worry about it for this video, but as we discussed earlier on this, you can actually, this is where you change your DPI settings. which as we discussed earlier, is how you change the intensity of your engraving. So the DPI has relevance to the rastering or the engraving functionality. You can also mirror your image in here with a simple click of the button. We won't worry about that too much for today. Moving down through the functions here, vector function, inside out cutting, I'm going to suggest you will use. That is for if you had a job with small cuts inside big cuts. Let's say if you're cutting a wheel, it would be important to cut the axle hole before you cut the outside of the wheel. Typically, a laser will process a file in the same order that you created it. So if you as you were drawing the file, if you drew the outside of the wheel before you drew the axle hole, that's exactly how the laser will process it. We don't want that to happen. So in those sorts of applications, I'm going to suggest you will want to be using inside out cutting.
What issues will occur if we don't do the inside out cutting in this situation?
Essentially, the workpiece will fall out of position. If you do the outside, if you cut the outside of the wheel first, it could fall down, and it could even go. It could, if you had your workpiece set up on blocks, for example, it would fall completely out of focus before it cut the axle hole. So it's always important to cut the inner holes first before you cut the outside shape, so to speak.
Yep. And otherwise you might not get centers and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. It could move or fall out of focus. Lots of things can go wrong there. This halftone function, that comes into play when you're using the black and white mode. We won't discuss that in this training session. Okay, moving on now to our pen colors. I suppose the most interesting, the most critical part of the where you're doing your settings. As we discussed earlier, what we're doing now, the highlighted one is the one that we're setting. So we can see the highlight. You can change, through your 5 different colors. As we discussed earlier, engraving is typically done at high speed, low power. So for today, we've got a bit of 3mm. I think, what do you got there, Doug? I think a bit of 3mm acrylic, perhaps. I'm going to suggest the engraving on that. We're going to set that at about 80% speed and 30% power. So there we have it. 80% speed, 30% power for the engraving function. The other thing that you notice here is the air tick box. Once again, as we discussed when we were looking at the physical construction of the machine, the air comes out of the nozzle, the same nozzle as the laser beam comes out of. And by using the air as much as possible, I suggest that you use the air for everything, unless, of course, you're doing some very lightweight material like paper or very thin fabric. I would suggest using the air for everything because it helps keep the lens and the mirror clean. It keeps positive pressure in the head of the laser and thereby stops smoke and other debris getting up on the lens. So let's say it's a bit of a golden rule, use air for everything. It is absolutely essential, however, you do use air for cutting, but let's say it's a good idea to use air for everything. As discussed earlier, cutting is done at low speed, high power. 3mm acrylic, I'm going to suggest that will be, we'll have to set our speed at probably around about 0.5. So we'll move that down to 0.5, and the power, let's run that up to 90%. As we discussed earlier, I'm a great believer in not running these machines at 100% power, as it will enhance the tube life. As discussed earlier, we won't go into it in great depth right this minute, as the other setting that is adjustable for cutting, for the vectoring, is the PPI. Set it 400 default. I'm going to suggest that we leave it there for this purpose of this video. You can adjust that. As we discussed, that will, in certain instances, improve your edge quality, in that it will reduce the coining effect on the edge of thicker acrylics. So we'll leave that. It was default at 400, so let's leave it somewhere there for now. We'll pass over the dithering mode. Once again, that's got to do with the black and white mode. Rotary attachment we're not worried about today. What we are interested in, however, is this position mode. Once again, I'm going to suggest that the most common one you will use will be relative. And that is that function we discussed where you can drag the head of the machine to its starting position. And then it will start engraving at the top left-hand corner of your artwork. The other one,
relative to where you put the head of the laser.
It's correct. It's relative to where you've placed the head of the laser. The other one you will use, and we'll cover off later, is center. You will use the center mode. It's also very useful for when you're wanting to put artwork in the middle of perhaps in the middle of a pencil case or the middle of a tabletop or whatever you might be doing. But let's use it relative for the moment. And that's the long and the short of it. The job is done. Now, while we're coming here, I will show this file function. Let's say these settings we've got up here, the 80-30 for engraving and the 90 or 0.5 and 90 for the cutting. If we find that those settings work really, really well, we're very happy with them. What you can do is you can save those. So you can save those. It'll open up a file. Now, what we find a lot of schools do, they'll save that to a shared drive somewhere. It might be a cloud file or a shared drive on the server. But wherever we choose to share it, we can call that, in this case, let's call that 3mm acrylic, ACRYLIC, and hit save. Now, two things will happen. That will show up in the history file of this particular computer. But if you're on another computer and it hasn't shown up in the history file, you can just simply go load, find it on the shared drive, and open, and it will bring all those settings in for you. So the school will start to build up its library of settings according to the materials that you use, and yeah, as I say, you'll start to get a bit of a library happening, and you can save them to a common file, and all teachers and students can access them.
Just curious to know, what's that parameters button down the bottom right there?
The parameters button is some presets supplied by GCC. Now, I happen to be just not a very big fan of them. Sure, if you want to play with them and you find that they work well, go for it. I just tend to find that I prefer to set up my own settings. I don't know why these aren't perfect, but whether it's the materials are different in different parts of the world, but typically the GCC settings don't seem to work too well on materials here in Australia. So yeah, as I say, I don't normally make a big fuss out of that. I don't use it myself, but it's there. If you'd prefer to use it that way, go for it.
Sure.
Okay, so we've set our power and speed. We go OK, and then we go apply, and then this mightn't work because I'm not hooked up, and OK. and then that should have sent it through. And on the screen of the laser now, you will see the file will have come through with whatever the name you happen to call your file, and the power and speed settings will have shown up.